This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's first on-demand workshop, How to Become a Coffee Consultant. Available now online for you to learn at your own pace with a certificate available upon completion. Click the link in the show notes to access today for just €50. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 4 of our 5-part series with Aaron from Blendin Coffee Club in Houston, Texas. Aaron, today we're talking about cultivating the best coffee professionals. Now, you as a GM, you get to oversee the careers of the people who work in the cafe and roastery and training center that are under the umbrella of Blendin. Having been in the industry for 20 years, I came in at the time when it was at the very, very genesis of this shift. We had just, I don't think even the first year that I was in coffee, we knew that the word was specialty coffee. We weren't really, we knew that there's two different kinds of coffee. There's like this proper like artisan way of doing things that was a very fancy way of doing coffee. And then there was everything else. And I knew that I only wanted to be a part of that other fancier side of things. But there was no way of knowing like what a coffee professional is really going to have a long-term career at. Now we're at the point where 20 years later, we have the SCA professionalizing and running really great trade shows around the world and having training programs and really trying to shift things into a direction that modernize things. For example, the new cupping forms, etc., etc. For you, running a company, being the general manager of a company like Blendin Coffee, having the perspectives that you have, the very kind of progressive, and I don't mean that in a political sense, folks. I mean that in the perspective of as a professional leader, you have a very progressive way of approaching being a general manager. How do you cultivate the best out of the professionals and turn them into the best professionals that they can be?
So I think that all starts from their training right after onboarding.
Right.
Just laying out very clearly kind of the expectations that we have as a company. You know, we're a very quality driven company, and you see that, and it's reflected in kind of our systems that are in place to maintain quality and, you know, increase quality. So just being open and straightforward kind of throughout the training process, you know, that we do have these standards that we want to be reflected as a company, so that when someone walks into Blendin Coffee Club, they're getting, you know, a great experience from the time that they walk in. And it, you know, it's written in the training manual, like customer walks in, make sure you greet them, and, you know, small things like that. I think going into detail throughout that training process, making sure that the expectations are known, and then reinforcing that kind of throughout their time as an employee. I think it's important that, you know, you make your standards and expectations known, and you stick to them. I think, you know, if you're able to accomplish that and kind of have everyone on the same page in terms of what the company expects in their role, I think it makes things go a lot smoother, and there's, you know, less questions in regards to maybe, you know, how we're doing a very specific task or something like that.
You mentioned something really interesting there, standards. You know, this is a really big deal when it comes to the quality of what we're serving, whether it's in the cup or whether it's in the customer service or the bag of roasted coffee or the branding, the presentation within the cafe. How do you go about approaching standards when it comes to helping staff understand where they're going to aim for themselves?
Okay, so if I understand the question, sorry, whenever are you asking about like specific?
Let me ask it a different way. Often when you're onboarding people, particularly if they don't know what they want to be doing coffee, that, you know, it's their first coffee job, or they've come from somewhere else that has different standards. Now,
Mm.
from knowing you and knowing the kinds of standards that you have, if we're talking about creating the best coffee professionals, how do you bring their expectations of what the standards should be? How do you bring that in alignment with the standards that you expect as a business?
Yeah, I think that comes from just showing them what that standard looks like. Whenever you introduce a new team member to the team, it's making sure that, you know, obviously the team you have in place is all operating at the same standards. But it's showing what that looks like. You know, whether it's how we create recipes or how we do quality control for our brew bar. I think it's, you know, you have to be able to see the standard to understand it. So just, you know, making sure that that training program is very thorough and it's been thought out, and you've you know, make sure that throughout that process, if they have questions, you're answering those, and if you don't know the answer, then you're finding them out and relaying that information to them. I think that's also a really important part of it, kind of throughout that, you know, when you're having those conversations about what the standards look like, you know, making sure that their questions are being answered, because, you know, when you have baristas that maybe come from a different cafe, they may do things a little bit differently. That is not uncommon. A lot of coffee shops do things differently. So our standards might not be the same as someone else's. And so it's actually it's an exercise for me when I'm going through training. I will get some questions that really make me think, okay, like, you know, why do we have this standard in place? You know, being able to talk through that and kind of listen and understand where they're coming from, and then explaining our standard, and who knows, maybe something new can come out of it. You could find out that there's this really great and amazing way of doing things that you hadn't discovered yet. I think being very open about that, that, you know, I'm learning from them just as much as they're learning from me, and just being kind of, yeah, open about, you know, that aspect of the training.
When it comes to professionalism, separate from skills, separate from, you know, how great they are with customer service, but having an employee with a standard of professionalism, how do you go about defining that? We hear a lot of people talk about, how do I get my staff to come to work on time? You know, how do I get them to go above and beyond if that's what's necessary in an era where people are like, no, this isn't my job description. I'm not going to do that. So how do you approach professionalism?
That's a great question. It makes me think about, you know, the whole like going above and beyond without necessarily getting compensation for that going above and beyond. Obviously, that's a huge thing right now in terms of getting someone to perform at a really high level, even though, you know, obviously their pay is not increasing based off of that. I think that's an interesting question. I also want to kind of hit on the fact that being a barista is a very like, there's a lot of emotional intelligence that's required for this job. You know, I don't think baristas get enough credit for it, but standing in front of people for, you know, 6-8 hours a day and greeting them and being friendly and smiling and like, this is a very emotionally taxing job. So I can totally understand, you know, how do you be professional and how do you convey that when it's something that like I said, it takes a lot of emotional intelligence to do. I think that if I had to kind of sum it up, it starts with just, is the person enjoying what they're doing? And if maybe they're not enjoying it in that moment, maybe it takes some shifting around in the cafe and let's put somebody on espresso bar and pulling shots, or, you know, just being very aware of kind of the environment and what's going on in the cafe at that point in time. I think as a general manager, the more in tune you are to that, the more adaptable you can be, and you, who knows, it may just take someone going and knocking out some dishes for 15 minutes just to give them a small break from, the greeting, smiling, happy face. So, yeah, I think just to tie together, being in tune with what's going on, again, back to being very in tune with what the employees are feeling. And it can go a long way in terms of making sure that the baristas feel seen, and in turn are hopefully, going that extra mile or performing at a very high level for an extended period of time, can last through the day.
And if your team, let's say your coffee roaster, isn't quite meeting the professional standards that you require in the way that they communicate with other staff, in the way that they complete, let's say they have to fill out forms, for, the log the roasts that they've done during the day and complete all the cuppings properly. Let's say they're not meeting those professional standards. So they're essentially not being the best professional that they could be. Is that a conversation that's had between you and them? Is that, how does that work as a GM?
I think, yeah, so definitely a conversation. But before kind of you get to the conversation, I think it's very important that you understand the entirety of the situation. There's, you obviously don't want to rush into anything, and you want to make sure you're understanding all perspectives of what's going on, especially, how the employee is feeling at that time. So it could be that, I don't know, there's a lot of things that could happen which could cause someone's kind of work standards to lower. But just making sure you're understanding the entirety of the situation, and just asking the questions before jumping into any conclusions. I think that's a huge part of it as well.
Yeah, wise words. That's a part of the emotional intelligence of being a general manager, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
I mean, far too often you'll have somebody who is in charge, whether they're an ops manager or a general manager, and they'll come up and say, what's going on? Your work's slipping, or, you just need to do better. When there's a whole other saga that's going on, they may be being bullied at work. They may be, too shy to actually express that there's something broken with the technology, and they're working overtime or working doubly hard to keep things together without having told you that actually it's the equipment that's broken and they don't know how to fix it, and they feel embarrassed by that. So really wise words there, Aaron. In the final episode of the podcast of this series, we're going to be talking about culture. And this is a big one because culture has absolutely become the spotlight of workplaces in coffee, and in a very intentional way over the last few years. So we're going to explore that in the next episode. We promise to stay away from any landmines, folks. We'd like to say that we'd promise, but you never know. It's me. So let's see where we go. Aaron's already freaking out before we've had the conversation. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in, friends. There are 2 ways you can support this podcast. Firstly, become a paid member of our YouTube channel. Secondly, you can join our Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video before you leave, and check the show notes for more information. Now, this is what you should check out next.